Introducing Dean Nelson, Chairman and Founder of Infrastructure Masons and CEO of Cato Digital.
All right.
Hello, thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Dean, you are a bit of a guru in the data center industry, so maybe you need to tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I've been in the industry about 33 years, so started at Sun Microsystems on my 21st birthday, ironically. Over 30 years of that one, I went from Sun to eBay to PayPal to Uber and ran global operations basically for digital infrastructure for that. And then the last 3 years, I've been doing this other fun stuff on boards, as well as now the startup company, Cato Digital.
Awesome. Well, you're not a stranger to Bloom. You've known Bloom for quite some time. Why don't you tell that story?
So KR and I were just talking earlier. It was almost 10 years ago to the day that we launched the first data center with primary power from fuel cells. Now back then that was a big deal, primarily because we said we're going to remove fuel or generators and UPS. Okay, so this is the digital infrastructure that runs the world, and for eBay that was $260 billion worth of commerce volume flowing through that engine every year. So you think about that, and then you're building infrastructure. What if it goes out? So we did a whole bunch of calculations on resiliency back in the day. We brought in UIUC. They did an entire study on this to go back and say, what's the probability of fault of now using fuel cells as primary power? And ironically, in that state, this is in Salt Lake City, Utah, we had 94% coal. That was the grid. It was just the nature of the beast and where we were. It was a low-cost area for us. But in the end, we put billions of dollars of infrastructure into that state. We tried to go back and change the laws, which we did. SB 12 happened so we could get more renewable energy things, but it just wasn't fast enough. And then you start to look at the efficiency. We backed up and looked at the entire system. And that was, if I could go back and create the energy on site, consume it 150 feet away all the time, the efficiency goes up. And then all of a sudden I knocked 60% off my carbon footprint. This is in 2012. Just think about the opportunity within that state. So that was one of those groundbreaking things that I remember the phone call. I was here in New York at a conference called Data Center Dynamics, and John Donahoe, the CEO of eBay Inc. at that point, Peter Gross and KR called up, and they said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. I'm like, way ahead of you, ready to go. And it was just such an easy conversation because I'd handed this to our engineering teams. And I said, we're about to design a brand new data center, second phase. We really should be thinking about this now. I want you to take the whiteboard, wipe it clean. You have 2 weeks. Tell me if fuel cells would actually work. And they will, at that point, they're like, there's no way. How could we remove generators and things? And so they came back 2 weeks later, and they were convincing me. And that was the key, is when you get the engineering teams all excited, you allow them to engineer, they create really, really cool things. Building cut in half, cost cut in half, like everything just got better, more efficient, and more resilient, and more sustainable.
Oh, well, that's incredible. So it's 10 years goes by, the industry hasn't stayed stagnant. There's been some changes inside this industry. Summarize what those key changes are.
Let me start with a little baseline first. Digital infrastructure. That's everything from when it leaves your phone or your device all the way through. So I'm going to go look at that YouTube video. It's going to fly over the network. It's going to hit a repeater. It's going to go back into a distribution hub, and it's going to go into a data center, which is going to go to a server, which is going to go to storage. That's the chain that happens. That system, there's 7 million data centers in the world. 7 million physically unique IDs. They have 105 gigawatts of capacity. They consume 594 terawatt hours of energy every year. That represents 2.4% of the energy draw globally. That's digital infrastructure. It's actually relatively small when you consider all the other consumers. But it runs the world, and we still have 2 billion people that are not online yet. Okay? We also will have 135 billion things by 2030. These are the IoT parts with 1 trillion sensors behind them. And this has nothing to do even with generate AI yet. That 2.4 suddenly can become 8 to 10% of the global energy draw because the entire world is basically consuming the infrastructure to operate. Doesn't matter if it's a utility grids to running on your phone. Everything is connected. So the problem we're facing today is that we're out of power. As you saw in some of the videos there, The largest market in the world is Loudoun County, Virginia. There's over 2,000 megawatts there. And Dominion is unable to provide power for at least 5 years. That's transmission lines, as Kara was talking about before. It's just difficult to get it there. They can generate, but they just can't distribute. So you have some of the biggest companies in the world, and I'm literally talking about all the hyperscalers, 85 co-location companies, everybody in that market trying to figure out, how do we solve it? Because if they can't, economically, development-wise, they go to other places. But guess what? The other places are running out too. California, Arizona, Utah, they're all having these constraints. So the ability to now say, I can do a microgrid, bridge that gap, right? Increase resiliency is the only answer. So 10 years later, we've come full circle into saying, can we now use this technology to hit all the different things that we're trying to accomplish? But the number one is, if I don't have power, I can't serve the world.
What do you think the forcing functions are where, while you were an early pioneer and early adopter, not all data centers, we've had some success, but not all data centers have adopted as their standard architecture. What do you think forcing functions are now where you see that changing?
Yeah, there's actually a couple factors here. First one is, if I don't have access to capacity, I have to come up with another answer. That's a pretty
Necessity
simple one.
being the mother of invention.
There it is,
Yeah.
there it is. And I really believe in forcing functions because that's when innovation happens. When you work under constraint, you come up with creative solutions. So we've seen this time and time again in history. So where we are in the industry right now is America, Europe areas, and then Asia, right? The growth patterns are incredible. And so that's one factor. There's just not enough energy in the right place. The second one is that we have a climate crisis, as KR outlined earlier. I think the world has woken up. And to me, this comes down to the investors, because follow the money, that's where things happen, period. If you don't have the money behind it, you're not going to be able to move something.
These guys.
Yes. So from my perspective, now you've got the biggest investors in the world saying, I am going to go focus on sustainable investments. So the money is moving that direction. Secondly, you have the biggest companies in the world focusing on climate goals. They're publicly stating net zero by a certain time frame. They don't know how to get there yet, but they're making that commitment. So between the investment dollars and those commitments from the largest companies in the world, that's the forcing function I think that's going to cause this to happen. Because that innovation that will come out of it, and I'll give you an example. Microsoft put out a fund that said, we're going to put $1 billion out there for anybody who can come up with innovative solutions to help us meet our sustainability goals. We're going to open up our patents. You can use them. That drives, acceleration of what we're trying to actually get done. That's what gives me a lot of hope. One other thing I want to mention is that I'm the chairman and founder of Infrastructure Masons. This is a professional association that is uniting the builders of the digital age. Think of all the people that build that engine and operate that around the world. The AWS is Google, Meta, Microsoft, Digital Realty, all those companies. We came together last year because things were not moving fast enough from a climate standpoint. So we gathered at a person's house, 40 executives, and said, let's find one thing that we can do together to address climate change for our industry. Just one. That was one of the most difficult things to do. Simplicity is. But we got it down to it, and the iMasons Climate Accord was born. That accelerated really quickly. Within 6 weeks, we had 73 companies signed up for it, including AWS, Google, Meta, Microsoft. Another 6 weeks after that launch, we were over 200 companies. 200 companies who represent over $6 trillion of market cap, all united on one goal. That is where I see real movement. So you take the investment side, you take the capacity constraints, and you take the public commitments, and everybody's aligned in to say, we're going to go achieve that goal because we have no choice not to. We must do it.
Well, it might be obvious to some. How do you see this as an opportunity for Bloom, and how does Bloom fit into this?
It's a pretty simple proposition if you think about it. And let me tell you, I'm not paid for this. I'm here because I actually have been a longtime believer in Bloom.
We did buy you dinner.
That's true. Yeah, okay. I think the key is that there's a real I'm trying to figure out how to put this. Our industry is extremely risk averse. They're very conservative. So they don't want to go back and try new things. When we go back and say, hey, remove your generators and UPS, put in a fuel cell, it'll be fine. Every engineer in the room goes, oh my God, I can't do that. Now when you say, I'm out of power, we have to come up with a solution. Every engineer goes and puts on their hat and figures it out, and guess what? I can do on-site generation. The actual natural gas lines are more resilient than the electrical lines. Like, they start doing the math because they have to solve a problem. So I think from Bloom's standpoint, the fact that we've got all these constraints in existing markets that are mature, that's one opportunity. Secondly, when you think of the emerging markets, who do not have energy resilience, but also have capacity problems, that opens up the door across the board. Whether it's Africa, India, anywhere across Europe, there's opportunities. So I think it is unbound when it comes to it.
Well, thank you. We've been long time committed to data centers. We know we have a great solution there, and it's leaders like you that are helping lead the way in the industry. Is there anything else that you'd like to add in closing?
I would say that number one thing is we should be challenging the status quo. There's a lot of people that think conservatively of how we're going to approach these things. We don't have time, we don't have time to actually wait. From the climate standpoint and the growth globally, that is really critical. Generative AI, I know you keep hearing these buzzwords. It is predicted now that infrastructure globally will triple in our industry. Remember that 2.4%? Imagine if that goes to 8 or 10%. We have supply chain constraints right now. We have capacity problems all over the place. We must come up with ways in which we're going to serve this demand. I don't see any other answer except microgrids within our industry to solve and bridge that gap to get both sustainability, cost, and capacity solved.
Excellent. We'll leave it there. Thank
Great.
you, Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you.